Everyone agrees on the importance of our health workers, but agreement on how much they should be paid? Not so easy. And after 5 months of NHS strikes and no end in sight, that's what people here want to talk about. And to do that, we're in the beautiful and historic walled city of York, which once boasted a population second in size only to London. The area has one Conservative and one Labour MP, and the city council is run by a Lib Dem Green coalition. We'll also be talking about the cost of living, a concern to so many. Do protesters have the right to disrupt our lives? And do political attack ads ever work? Welcome to Question Time. On our panel from the government, Jeremy Quin, previously a minister in the Home Office and MOD. He's now in the Cabinet Office as Paymaster General. Before politics, he worked in corporate finance for 25 years. Wes Streeting is the Shadow Health Secretary. He says Labour will commit to the biggest recruitment of nurses and doctors in NHS history if they win power. He's also announced he's writing a memoir about his journey from Council House to House of Commons. Carla Denyer is the co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. That's a task she shared with Adrian Ramsey for nearly 2 years. She's not an MP, but is part of the Greens' largest council group in Bristol since 2015. Merryn Somerset Webb knows all about money. She's currently a senior columnist at Bloomberg. Before that, she was the editor-in-chief of the UK's biggest-selling financial magazine, Money Week, and was a contributing editor to the Financial Times. And the Right Reverend Lord Sentamu is no stranger to these parts, having been Archbishop of York for 15 years. He fled Idi Amin's Uganda in the 70s and trained for the priesthood in Cambridge. After retiring as an Anglican bishop in 2020, he was made a crossbench peer. He also chairs the charity Christian Aid. Good evening from York. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to all of you. Lovely to see you here. And, of course, welcome to you at home. As always, we're on social media. We are on iPlayer at 8 o'clock every Thursday, as well as being live on BBC, or not live, but as well as being on BBC One after 10 o'clock news, of course. So, let's take our first question tonight. The panel do not know what the questions are going to be, as is the question time custom. Let's hear our first one from Murray Evans.
Hi. Is patient care being neglected by the greed of healthcare professionals or 13 years of government mismanagement?
Jeremy.
Thank you. Well, the first thing is that we all know how absolutely critical the NHS is. We all want to support it. That's why we are spending 30% more in real terms on the NHS now than was the case when Labour was last in office, why there's 250,000 more people employed in the NHS to care for all of us. There is a desperate situation in the health service in relation to these strikes. We are determined to get through it. A good offer was put to the nurses. I'm delighted that the largest union, Unison, with a third of the members in Agenda for Change, they've overwhelmingly voted in favour of that pay deal. We got to that pay deal after good negotiations, good discussions with the unions. I hope that that can be got over the line. I'm afraid, though, I have to say in relation to the BMA, it's not...
This is junior doctors you're talking about now.
It is junior doctors. And there is a limit as to what is and is not affordable. And a 35% increase in people's pay. All of us know it in this room, you know it in the audience, that a 35% increase doesn't work. And I do hope that they call off their strike action. They come in for talks with a more reasonable prospect as to where we can get.
Well, they're saying they will go into talks with you, and as you'll know, the Royal Colleges have got together and said the government and junior doctors should talk and use a conciliation service like ACAS. Junior doctors are saying they're happy to do that. The government's saying it won't do that. Why is that?
We were happy to speak to the junior doctors. You don't need an intermediary, you just need to have straightforward, constructive conversations like we had with the nursing
Just
unions.
so I'm clear, as I understand it, you're saying you won't talk to junior doctors unless they drop the 35% and drop any threat of future strike.
Well, they shouldn't be striking. And this is exactly... The nurses stopped striking and we came in and we had constructive discussions. The teachers, they weren't striking when we had the discussions with the teachers. So I think the BMA should reassure us all by saying they will not be going on strike. They will be coming in for discussions with the government, and they need to come up with a more realistic proposal that is affordable by the country. 35% is not. That's £20,000 increase for some junior doctors.
Well,
people listening to this programme, they know that's not right. They know it's not affordable. We need a fair solution. 35% increase is not it.
Murray Evans phrased it as, is patient care being neglected by the greed of healthcare professionals? You say it's not affordable. Are you calling it greed?
I'm saying it's not affordable.
Okay.
I don't think people are greedy in the health sector. They've been through a hell of a time through the pandemic. We all know they did a fantastic time looking after all of us, and we want a fair settlement. But we have to know what is fair and also affordable. 35% is not it.
Wes?
Well, first of all, let's just be honest about the state that the NHS is in. It's not on its ease, it's on its face. And it's on its face not just because of the pandemic pressures, but because going into the pandemic, we already had the highest waiting lists in the history of the NHS. Now they're even higher. We'd had more than a decade of underinvestment, which left the NHS chronically and dangerously exposed to the pandemic, more so than it would otherwise have been. And we've got a bunch of people working in the NHS who've been through the worst experience in peacetime working in a health service, who really appreciated it when we clapped for them and now feel clapped out, burned out, underappreciated and undervalued by the government.
Well, Wes, junior doctors, as you know, are asking for 35%.
Yeah,
Would you be prepared to give that to them?
Just on the junior doctors, the point they make about 35% is that their pay hasn't kept up in line with inflation. Now, I've got to be honest, if I was the Health Secretary today, I wouldn't be able to deliver a 35% pay increase overnight, and you wouldn't believe me if I said that I could from the comfort of opposition, or indeed the discomfort, because I don't enjoy opposition very much. But let me tell you what we should do. And I listened to the BMA this morning. They said 3 things which I thought were important. The first thing they said was that the 35% demand was a starting point. They're willing to negotiate down. The second thing they said was they put no preconditions on talks. They're willing to talk now. And the third thing they said, which what makes a mockery of what Jeremy said, what the Health Secretary said, what the Prime Minister said, there are currently no planned strike dates by junior doctors. So this is surely the window of opportunity when there are no strike dates, no preconditions and a willingness to negotiate down. Why on earth aren't you biting their hands off? Because when they go out on strike and lose their pay, when the nurses went out on strike, hundreds of thousands of patient operations were cancelled. And I don't blame the nurses, I don't blame the junior doctors, I do blame the stubborn intransigence of this government who said they want to tough it out.
OK. Woman there in the black jacket. Yes.
Hi. I wish that we would not talk about 35% for the doctors. First of all, in the last negotiation, they lost pay, and you know that. And may I just ask you, in numbers, not percent, how much have you seen your pay rise in the same amount of time?
Would you like to answer that?
It'll be the same as Wes's, and I don't know what the answer is.
You don't know how big your pay rise has been?
The honest answer is, and it's an uncomfortable answer given the way you've couched it, when I was elected in 2015, sort of coming up for 8 years ago, I think the pay was something just above £65,000 a year. Yeah. Now our pay is just over £82,000 a year. And so MPs have had the pay go up, and the argument was, and it's not set by us, by the way, we wouldn't be daft enough to vote through that sort of pay rise. It's done independently. But the argument was that MPs' pay hadn't kept up in line with inflation, and all sorts of issues about competitive pegging and all the rest of it. I just wished, in terms of the nurses and the doctors, we would see this not just in terms of cost of living pressures in their pockets, but this is a retention issue as well. Nurses are leaving the NHS. Junior doctors are looking to go overseas. Australia and countries like that, they're pulling them in. So there's national self-interest here, as well as doing the right thing by a bunch of people who've always done the right thing by us.
I'm fascinated that you don't know the size of your pay rise, given you're Paymaster General.
Happily. Alas, it's been about 200 years since the Paymaster General did any paying. But Wes is absolutely right. It's not the government that sets MPs' pay. It's IPSO.
Okay. Well, let's get back to doctors.
And let's get back to doctors. But can I just say to Wes, though, that we've had 5,000 new doctors joining this year. There's 11,000 more nurses joining this year. There are 245,000 extra people working in the NHS.
And how many leaving?
That's a net figure. We do need to have doctors and nurses who are committed and supporting us in bringing down waiting lists. We've already brought down the waiting list from the peak that we saw during COVID. That's what the Prime Minister is determined to deliver on. We will get there, but 35%, I come back to it, is not a realistic starting point.
Well, just on waiting lists, something like 7 million people were waiting to start routine hospital treatment at the end of February. That's the highest total since records began in 2007. So I'm not quite sure where you're getting your figures from.
Well, since 2007, we've had a global pandemic, and COVID caused an immense problem. And you know that, Fiona. Everybody knows.
Yes, but this is the highest since records began in 2007. It's not the highest since the pandemic.
And it was highest pre-pandemic, the highest level.
It is. The pandemic caused enormous problems. We are putting the investment in. As I say, we're paying 13% more in real terms than Labour ever put into the NHS, and we are driving down those waiting lists.
All right, let me hear a bit more from the audience, and then I'll come to you, Carla. Yes.
I'd remember a 20k pay rise. Secondly, people don't strike for fun. They strike as a last resort. And so, you know, I have a little team that I look after at work, but I wouldn't let it get to crisis point. I'd listen to them, especially if they were in my team for 13 years. So I think you've got to take some accountability for, we're 13 years on, why have you let it get to this point?
Lord Sentamu, let me just remind you of the question. Is patient care being neglected by the greed of healthcare professionals or 13 years of government mismanagement?
I have just had 2 serious tests which they did on me in a hospital not far away from here. Was I taken care of properly? Yes. I'm one of those who had five major operations. And in each one of them, the nurses, the doctors, particularly the nurses, were marvellous. So I want to say the care is still quite high. The problem we've got is that social care particularly was moved away when the National Health Service was set. It went to local councils who really didn't have the ability and the expertise to do it. Most of them now are private places. I'm glad that the government has brought social care and National Health Service together, and I hope they'll stay that way. The way I see it for myself is that with the junior doctors, government, please sit around the table. Do not focus on the 35% as a barrier to actually deal with the issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Sit around the table and have it resolved. And again, I want to say to the Royal College of Nurses, the group that I've always supported, because when Stephen Lawrence's inquiry brought the report, they were the first organization to accept that they're going to deal with institutional racism. And they've done it. So I want to say to you, please reconsider the possibility that you could still go on not needing a strike. You know, everybody has a right to actually withdraw their labor. This is part of our democracy. But there's some circumstances where we need to think carefully. And I agree with the lady who said that people sometimes go on strike as a last resort. We want people to have a conversation, to be able to deal with it. And if they don't, I'm afraid, just like another Ugandan saying, that when 2 elephants fight or make love, the grass gets hurt.
Oh, Carla, yes, go on, and I'll come back to you.
I absolutely agree with the point just made at the front. None of the healthcare workers are striking because they enjoy it, because they enjoy losing pay. You know,
but what the question is about is basically what you mean, Mer, I think, by our health professionals being greedy. Are they asking for too much money? That's the question. Or is it government mismanagement that's to blame?
It is government mismanagement that is to blame. That's very clear. And I wanted to go on to picking up something that Jeremy said. He claimed that the NHS is funded more in real terms. Well, that's true if you define real terms as including inflation. But if you include the increase in demand, the increase in people that need treating, and the increase in the severity of health issues that they come to the NHS with that need treating, then it's not an increase in funding in real terms, it is a decrease. And health professionals have been very clear about that the demand is increasing and there is not enough funding for them to do their job. You only have to speak to a healthcare worker, and I have been down on the picket lines with the nurses and the junior doctors listening to their experiences, and so many of them were there not just for their own personal pay, but because they were worried about the future of the NHS as a whole. They could see it crumbling, they could see that they weren't able to give the service they needed.
All right.
Now, the Conservative response to these strikes has been disappointing but predictable. I think we all knew that when the Conservatives clapped for carers and said they love the NHS, that rhetoric was paper thin. But what I can't understand, I'm afraid, Wes, is how Labour think they're going to repair the damage to the NHS and fill those 133,000 vacancies if you're not willing to be clear and say that you will restore 13 years of real terms pay cuts to healthcare workers. How are you going to fill those vacancies if you aren't willing to at least hold their pay steady in real terms? Now, the junior doctors are saying 35% because they have seen a 26% at real terms pay cut over the last however many years it is. It is not unreasonable for them to say 35 as a starting position for a negotiation, and that's really clear for us all to understand. It's not an ultimatum. That's what negotiations are about. You go in with a starting position. They've done that. Now it's over to the government, and the government are sitting on their hands.
Merryn, let's hear from you.
Right. Back to the question. And let's look specifically at junior doctors and the extent to which they are underpaid or overpaid. Now, the first thing to say is that we know that over a career, doctors are not underpaid. Now, we know that because only very recently we had to make major changes to our pension system in order for consultants to be able to continue to save into their pensions far beyond what ordinary people would ever be able to. So we had to change our pension system because consultants, doctors at the very top, are paid so much. So we have doctors at the beginning.
They can spend many years getting to that point.
Absolutely. So what we need to think about is how can we restructure the timeline of the income of people working inside the NHS. And one thing that you can start off by doing is saying, well, let's pull forward some of that pension, or let's suggest to doctors that they pay less in the way of pension contributions at the beginning and build up a smaller pot over time. So that's one way to do it, just to restructure the timeline. The other thing to look at is the way in which young doctors have to pay student loans. And this is something relatively new, and this is a perfect place to talk about it at a university. But until relatively recently, a new doctor wasn't paying 9 percentage points in effective tax on top of their income tax the second they started work. So the marginal rate of tax for a new person entering the workforce is going to be about 41%. 41%. So that means that a junior doctor now has very significantly less disposable income in real terms than they might have had 15, 20 years ago. This really, really matters. And there are very simple ways that we can change that. We could change the entire system because it doesn't work very well, but maybe we won't do that today. What we could do is say to junior doctors, do you know what? For every year you stay in the NHS, we'll cut that by 1 percentage point, maybe 2 percentage points. So you will be clear of that horrible level of student debt significantly sooner than other people, or you'll pay a lower level of effective income tax over your career. So that's, I think, a very good place to start. The other very important thing I think about this, and we've talked, several people have mentioned the way junior doctors are leaving the NHS, and where do they go? They go to Australia. So what we should be doing is saying, well, hang on a tick. Let's have a look at Australia. Let's have a look at their healthcare system. What makes their healthcare system able to provide an environment in which our nurses and our doctors want to live? But you know what? We can't replicate that climate. We really can't. But we could have a good think about how we could replicate a system that gives doctors a good work balance and high levels of pay. And do you know what that is? It's a public-private system. It's not a free at the point of use for anything you want system. It's a different kind of system. Now, if we want somewhere where our doctors and our nurses want to be, we have to take a deep breath and look around the world at the systems that our doctors and our nurses are leaving to go to.
OK. I'm going to move on a minute because there's a number of questions to get through. Wes, do you just want to reply to Carla's point?
Yeah, I'd just say, look, this is the point of having a negotiation, so you can talk through those issues. And I just say to people, firstly, we're not going to make promises we can't keep, and we are being really careful about the promises we make, not least given the lack of trust in politics. Second thing I'd say, look at our record when we're in government. Pre-97, there were big demands for pay restoration. We said then, we're not going to commit to it in the manifesto because we can't be 100% certain when we'll be able to deliver it, but we did. We did deliver full pay restoration under the last Labour government. How? Because we've got the economy growing, so able to invest in our public services and people's pay without hiking up taxes, the highest levels in 70 years. So we did it before. We'd like to do it again, but any commitment in Labour's manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded, so people can actually trust what it is we're offering.
It doesn't have to be 35%. That's based
on the RPR,
right? If you look at it based on CPI, it's more like 20.
And this is the point of the negotiation, and that's why I can't for the life of me understand why there aren't talks underway. There is nothing to be lost from talking, but everything to be gained for hundreds of thousands of patients who are going to see their...
Two general points. Two general points.
Really quickly, because I'm going to move on.
Just 2 points for Wes. I don't think your numbers add up. You've got £90 billion of unfunded commitments. I don't believe it works. And just to remind you, the audience will remember the state you left the economy in 2010, the state you left the public finances.
Brass neck, Jeremy, after you guys crashed the economy and sent people's mortgages through the roof and left us in this mess with rocketing inflation.
Okay.
That is not the case.
All right.
That is not the case. You know it.
All right. Next week, we are in Ealing. I just want to tell you where we're going to be next week. And the week after that, Question Time is in Telford in Shropshire. So if you want to come along and be part of the audience, Ealing or Telford, go to the Question Time website. You can follow the instructions there. And all the dates and locations of future Question Times are there too, so you can see if you'd like to come along. Right, I'm going to try and get in quite a few questions tonight, so I'm going to move on to Paul Reid.
When the cause is considered of global importance, should the right to protest include the right to disrupt?
So, there's been quite a bit of protest recently, Paul, which is why you're talking about it. Obviously, you had the snooker championships, powder all over the green bays at the Grand National, and of course there have been Just Stop Oil protests, and before that with people gluing themselves to the road, and before that, Extinction Rebellion. And then there's a marathon in London coming up this weekend, and there's all sorts of talk about possible protests there. Lord Sentamu.
I believe that in a democracy, in a country lovely as this, people have a right to protest. It is given within them. You just cannot say that I can't protest. But they haven't got the right to destroy other people's property. They haven't got the right really to stand in the way when people are carrying on their own business. And then, of course, now has come a thing that in order to protest, you must disrupt. And of course, the police have a lot of powers. You don't need the law that's going through the House of Lords at the moment.
This is the Public Order Bill.
Public Order Bill, where, for example, if an inspector believes that somebody needs to be stopped and searched, they will be stopped and searched. No ground for suspecting. No, it's now believing. So if I wake up one morning and I'm an inspector and I believe that all the people in the panel here need to be stopped and searched, you'll be stopped and searched. Why? What are the reasons? I don't think that's necessary. And I would have thought that people, if I want to protest, I've also got to observe the rights of others. I just cannot be the leader and the holder of the universe. We're not. We're not the holder of the universe. But the right to protest, I think, is legitimate. Violence with it is not. Disrupting to such an extent that you cause damage. And again, the police should have the powers, and they've got the powers to actually stop that kind of behavior. So protest, yes. Confusion and chaos and destroying people's properties, I don't think so. By the way, tomorrow, there is a service at St. John Waterloo about fossil fuel. Some of us feel that the government is not doing enough. When the service is over, we are marching to Parliament peacefully. Now, if they said we shouldn't have that right to do it, that would no longer be a democracy, but a police state.
Okay. So, Carla, should the right to protest include the right to disrupt? I mean, some would argue, I imagine some of the Just Stop Oil protesters would argue when they'd glue themselves to the road or hanging on from a bridge over a motorway, that unless they disrupt, people aren't going to pay any attention.
Well, I think, as Lord Sentamu said, the right to non-violently protest, which involves some disruption, is so important. You only have to look at countries that stamp down on protest to see the impact that has on the health of the democracy and of human rights in those countries.
But what about the harder stuff, Carl?
But my focus...
when people block roads, for example, is in the name of stopping fossil fuels, as a member of the Green Party, as a co-leader, is that legitimate?
As I say, the right protest, essential.
But I think everyone's going to agree
that doesn't necessarily mean... Well, I mean, given the laws the Conservative government are trying to pass at the moment, I don't think we do all agree on that.
I take your point.
I stand by and strongly defend the right to protest. It doesn't mean I necessarily agree with every tactic used at every single protest. I think they do have to take into account the impact on other people.
So,
and I think it's a delicate
specifically
balance.
that, for example, as a co-leader of the Green Party, if people want to glue themselves to the road to try to publicise their desire to stop investment and use of fossil fuels, do you agree with that?
It's really not my job. I'm not the arbiter of all protesters.
No, I just want your opinion.
I'm the co-leader of the Green Party.
So what's your opinion politically? You must have one.
I mean, it really isn't my job to arbitrate on it.
It is your job, isn't it?
I get asked all the time. But look,
that's what Question Time's about.
Let me answer then. Okay. I think that as long as they're moving out of the way for emergency vehicles, which I know that the vast majority of protesters will do, then I think that a certain amount of disruption like that is acceptable if it achieves the aims, which it often has, of raising climate change right up the political agenda. And it has people talking about Green Party policies like a nationwide home insulation programme that just wasn't on the political agenda until people started doing that. So I can see why they do it. I think as long as they do it carefully and respectfully of other people's rights and safety, I think there is some justification. But if you just let me finish, No, I'm not interrupting. Okay, I'm just pointing who I might come to next. My focus as co-leader of the Green Party is on achieving change, on tackling climate change, the cost of living crisis and all the other issues that everyone faces day to day through the political process rather than through protest. We've got hundreds of Green councillors already working hard, tackling these issues in council chambers, and we've only got 2 weeks until there's an opportunity for millions of people to elect hundreds more. That's my focus as the co-leader of the Green Party. But what I will say, just quickly, is that I do agree with the ultimate objectives of many of the protesters who will be out in London this weekend, that we need to move faster on tackling climate change and that those in positions of power have not done enough. Okay. That's what made me join the Green Party.
All right, I need to bring other people in.
The Green Party. It's what made me stand for election. It's what made me declare the first climate emergency declaration anywhere in Europe and push local and national government to move faster on tackling climate change.
Right. The man there in the glasses and the blue shirt.
I think some of the methods that the rebellion protesters use turn people away from the subject that they're trying to communicate to us. And what they should do, moreover, is get involved with the system and work within the system to champion their cause.
Now, interestingly, Extinction Rebellion, who you're referring to, have changed their tactics, and they now say that their policy is one of demonstration rather than disruption, relationships rather than roadblocks. I'm just putting that out there, and they're not going to target the London Marathon, for example, this weekend, though they will be protesting
they're actually defending
elsewhere
it,
in London. They're saying that they're going to guard it, I think is the word, which is quite a change, I would suggest. Yes, the woman there in the green top.
I think, obviously, we've seen more disruptive protests recently, but I think the disruption we're seeing now through these protests is nothing compared to the disruption that's going to come as an occurrence of climate change. Absolutely. And I think it's quite small fry compared to what's going to be happening in the future as a result of climate change. And we're getting quite bogged down in this disruption, and it's kind of steering the political conversation away from it, when really we're not doing much. We're taking retrograde steps, such as the government reinstating fracking in certain areas of the UK. And I just really think we're getting bogged down and we're not going forward at all, as Carla's kind of said already. And I just encourage the government to kind of do more.
Carla, I've got to bring other... I'm so sorry, but I've just got to let other people have you as well. I'm not trying to shut you down, Carla, I promise. The man there in the white and blue top.
As a young person, I really care about the environment, but to go around disrupting people's lives, blocking ambulances, that is just not acceptable. And it doesn't persuade people to come on the cause and help tackle climate change. It just turns people away, and they have to stop.
OK. Jeremy.
Again, I agree entirely with that gentleman and the gentleman who spoke earlier. It turns people away from the causes that are being represented when people take on these tactics. There is
But what about the
protest.
point that some of them might make, which is, unless they do something which, I mean, it may annoy a lot of people, but unless they do something that people really notice, people aren't going to pay attention.
We've made huge strides in tackling climate change in this country, quite rightly so. And that comes from a whole range of tactics. I get umpteen emails about this from constituents, rightly so. I get it every time I visit a school. This is on everybody's lips. It is a really serious matter, which we're taking really, really seriously. People have got an absolute right to protest. It's part of our DNA. They don't have the right to disrupt our lives. And I'm sorry, Carla, you can't get out of the way of an emergency vehicle if you're glued to the road. And that's what we've been seeing. We've been seeing protests that go way beyond what is reasonable. They've gone into disrupting people's lives. They've gone into disrupting people trying to get to hospital, trying to visit people in hospital. That's not right. We had to do something about it. People should always have the right to protest, but you can never have a situation, it's an arrogant situation to think, that your right to disrupt trumps someone else's right to get to work, to get to hospital, to visit relatives, to be part of their community. That's not right, and we had to take action on it.
Merryn. In the main here, I would agree with Jeremy that the right to protest is, of course, sacrosanct, but the right to disrupt other people's lives is absolutely not. And one of the things that I found quite disturbing recently about, in particular, the Just Stop Oil protests and the earlier Extinction Rebellion ones, is that they are completely pointless, because I've never seen a political consensus such as the one that we must reduce emissions and we must fight climate change. And if you look at what the UK has done over the last 30 years, it's been really astonishing. You know, we've reduced our emissions by, well, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but about 40%. And if even once you include outsourcing, etc., it's about a third. So, you know, it's
yes,
a really
what we're not on track is to meet
shift.
the targets that we have set under the Paris Agreement.
I think it's very unlikely that anyone is going to meet those targets. They're incredibly difficult to get to. We have so much technological movement we need to get through if we want to make this transition without hugely affecting people's living standards. And this is where some of these protests are a problem, because they're lacking the nuance that we have here. We have to make trade-offs, and I think even Carla would accept that there have to be trade-offs here. You can't turn this stuff off tomorrow. You can't say no fossil fuels. 80% of the world's energy still comes from fossil fuels after all the work we've done. We do better with electricity. You know, the amount of electricity that comes from renewables is falling faster than energy use as a whole. But nonetheless, this is a long journey, and if you want to speed it up significantly, you have to accept very dramatically falling living standards at the same time. And you cannot speed up this transition to the extent that I think you want and deal with the cost of living crisis that we all worry about so much. You can't have both. There has to be nuance. There has to be trade-offs. And what these protests do is deny that. And I think that that's a long-term problem for us.
The best campaigns are the ones that draw people in and build the biggest political consensus and put pressure on decision makers to go further and faster to achieve your goals. And that's been my frustration at some of the tactics used in recent days and in recent months and years, is that actually they have the opposite effect. They take where there's actually broad consensus and push people away, or shift the conversation to one about tactics rather than outcomes, which is where we should be. And actually on climate change, I am frightened that we're not making enough progress. And I'm also frustrated because I don't share the pessimism, actually, that moving towards net zero is one that involves a poorer quality of life. Quite the opposite, actually. If you think about the energy crisis we have at the moment, the lack of energy security that leaves us prone to world events, or worse still, dependent on global tyrants. If you think about the soaring energy bills we have in our country and the lack of good quality, well-paid jobs we have, particularly in areas that have suffered massive deindustrialisation. If we invested in renewable energy and new nuclear and home insulation, it creates jobs, good, well-paid jobs. It helps to lower bills, and it helps to reduce our emissions and help us towards net zero. So everyone wins, and I think that's That's the lack of ambition I think we still see, actually, and why people are right to push us to go further. And that's why I don't think Labour would have had the commitment we have to become a green energy superpower in our manifesto if there hadn't been the big national conversation, the evidence-led conversation, the climate scientists informing us, the grassroots movement behind it. But we've got to deliver as politicians, and that will be better served at the ballot box, actually, by voting in politicians who are committed and have a plan, rather than gluing yourself to the railings or the roads and turning people off, stopping people getting to where they're going, and alienating millions of voters across the country who are fundamentally on the same side. Let's put in the right direction and get the politics to meet the ambition of the country, and that's what we want to do.
Carla, let me just give you a moment to respond to what Merryn had to say. Briefly, if you would.
I'm afraid I fundamentally disagree with your assertion that we can't tackle climate change and cost of living at the same time. We absolutely can, and there are so many measures that tackle both. The UK has the leakiest homes in Europe. People are spending so much on their energy bills only for it to blow out the windows and the doors and the gaps because they're poorly insulated. If we had a proper, big, nationwide home insulation programme, street by street, that insulated people's homes, it would bring down their bills, it would give them warmer, more comfortable homes which are healthier, and we've heard all about recently the issues with living in cold, damp homes, and it would tackle carbon emissions. It can be done. You also asserted that the problems are technical. I disagree, and I say that as an engineer who used to work in the renewable energy industry and chose to step out of that industry into politics because I saw that the reason wind farms weren't being built fast enough, and solar panels and all the rest, was not technology, it was political will. And so I got tired of asking those in power to do the right thing fast enough. It wasn't happening. So I chose to get elected, to get into power, to make it go faster. I'm not saying political will is the only barrier, but I'm saying it's the biggest barrier. The technology is, for the most part, there. We just need to move faster, and that is a matter for us as politicians, and it's why I'm standing for election.
All right, Merryn,
I have to interrupt just to say that
I want it so briefly, but I have to move on. OK, I'll let you both disagree about whether technology is there or not. I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on. You both talked about the cost of living. We've got a question about that, and I'd like to hear it from Joe Milner. Joe, where are you? There you are.
Hi. As an independent coffee shop who employs 9 people, there is an absolute limit to what I can charge for coffee and cake. With increased stock prices of 34% over the last 6 months, energy more than doubling, and a minimum wage rise, how am I supposed to survive?
Well, and how are you surviving, Joe? I mean, how
I'm not being paid.
You're not paying yourself?
No. My staff are getting paid, and my husband's got to work away Monday to Friday because he can't get a job that pays enough if he doesn't. So my 10-year-old doesn't see his dad from Monday to Friday. And I work 7 days a week.
And your husband's salary is helping keep you afloat?
It's the only thing that keeps us afloat, yeah. It's the only thing that pays our bills. And we're right in the middle. We're mortgaged, and we're not on social housing, we're not on benefits, we can't get benefits, we can't get any support, we can't get anything because we're right in that middle gap.
Right.
And we're not being supported.
Well, I suspect there'll be other people who feel they are in a similar position to you. Let's deal very specifically with what Joe's situation is and what the answers to it might be, because she's in it right now and she won't be alone in that. Jeremy.
Look, thank you for what you do, and thank you for keeping 9 people employed and for providing a service, which clearly this is your life's work, this is what you plumbed everything into, and to work 7 days a week, to not pay yourself a wage, it puts a lot of the discussions we have absolutely into perspective, and we all know how desperately tough it is. There has been support. There is £94 billion of support going to address the cost of living crisis, announced in the autumn statement this year and next. That's the money that's been committed, including help, which I'm sure you would have received to do with your energy bills. For the average person, around half there, it was a huge bill. About half of the bill was actually picked up by the government during the course of the winter. There has been interventions we've made. We're continuing to make them. But what you absolutely...
In terms of energy bills, Jeremy, obviously, and what you say is right, but Joe's energy bills will have gone up. Because the government subsidised them for so long and is now doing less so. Well,
we subsidise them, we continue to subsidise them until June. They should be coming down from June. So we are expecting those prices to come down. And we all know what caused this. This was Putin invading Ukraine, and I know that comes right back to your coffee shop.
But the reason I said that, and I'm going to do this to everyone on the panel, specifically, Because we all know Putin's invaded Ukraine, don't we?
And we know that that's a big issue.
How is Joe going to keep going and keep that coffee shop open?
So, the £94 billion that I referred to, that has partly gone towards supporting you in your coffee shop with subsidy to your energy bill. It's also supporting all those people who are your customers, so that they can keep on coming in and hopefully buying your coffee and keeping you going through this difficult time. But I tell you, we need to get on top of inflation, which is what we're doing, one of our top 5 priorities. Inflation is coming down. It'll continue to come down. Energy prices will be coming down in the summer. At the wholesale level, they're already coming off. If we get the economy working right, which is what we're doing, getting growth in the economy, which is happening now, getting inflation down, which is happening and will continue to happen over time.
It's not coming down as fast as you thought it might, is it?
I believe it'll still be halved, as the OBR believes, by the end of this year.
Okay.
And you will see the improvements coming. And I look forward to them coming, and I look forward to your coffee shop continuing to thrive. In the meantime, thank you for what you're doing, keeping it going. It's really important for you and your 9 employees.
I will come back to you, Joe. I'm just going to get round the panel. Merryn, what light is there at the end of the tunnel for Joe and others like her?
I'm trying to think of something positive to say. You know, inflation is a real problem. And one of the main things in there, and you'll be finding this, is food prices. So, you know, food prices were the shocker in this last inflation numbers, you know, up at 19%. And that's something that is happening, you know, across Europe. You're seeing these horrible food inflation numbers. The good news is that those will come down. So wheat prices, for example, are now back to roughly where they were when the invasion of Ukraine happened. And all the energy prices that feed into those food prices are beginning to come down soon as well. So we will see inflation fall, not, by the way, as a result of anything the government is doing, but as a result of global forces and changes. So we'll get there, but it's not something that the state can necessarily control. So you will see inflation coming down. Where I'm concerned that you'll continue to have trouble is with what you have to pay your staff, because your staff is just as entitled as anybody else's staff to ask for their wages to keep up with inflation. Private sector wages are currently rising at somewhere between 6 and 7%, depending on where you look, and your staff are going to be asking for those rises as well. And why should they take a real terms wage cut just because your business is suffering? So, you know, that's a really difficult situation. I think it's something you're going to be grappling with for the next couple of years, because even if inflation falls, employees now have this idea, quite rightly, embedded in their heads that prices aren't stable, that they are rising. And I think we should expect wage demands to keep going at a reasonably high level for the next couple of years. I think you're in a very, very difficult situation, and I really feel for you.
And of course, inflation coming down doesn't mean the price is going to come
down.
It just means they will rise less quickly. Can I just ask, is there anyone else here who runs a small business who's having difficulty? Yes. Let me just come to the man just behind Merryn there with the glasses. So you run a small business there, do you?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, I run a consultancy business. And there is a lot of work. I run an engineering consultancy business. There is a lot of work in the industry. But it is difficult for people to go into private working because of the regulations. IR 35 is one, for instance. It doesn't help people. It doesn't encourage entrepreneurship.
Okay.
It puts problems. I don't understand why the government cannot see that from an entrepreneurship point of view. If you go to America or elsewhere, they encourage entrepreneurship. Whereas we seem to be going the other way.
So R35 was being a particular piece of tax legislation.
That's one example, I said. That's one example.
And just in terms of staying with the cost of living for a moment, I appreciate that is a factor in there. The man here in the front, in the black sweater, so you run a small business as well, do you?
Yeah, as does my wife.
And what do you do?
I basically sell luxury goods. So at the moment, second-hand luxury goods. So at the moment, you know, business is quiet because cost of living, not many people are buying luxury goods. But on that note, when it comes to inspiring small business to grow, you charge me 20% margin scheme VAT, which I can't escape, so that's taxing my profit at source. And then at the end of the year, whatever I've got left, you're now raising the corporation tax to 25.9%. So I'm now, before I've made any money to pay any bills on myself, I'm now over 45% down on my profit. So you tax me once at margin and twice at the end of the year, which, to me, you've completely let down the backbone of the United Kingdom, which is small business.
Right. So I will come back to it. I'm just going to get around the rest of the panel. Look, I'm focusing... I'm hearing your other experience, but I'm focusing on Joe. We talk about the cost of living, not surprisingly, most weeks on Question Time. And I thought this might be one way to do it this week. So let's just come back to Joe a minute. What can you say to Wes? What can you say to Joe that would help her?
So I think as we try and get the economy to recover, people need help right now. And I think this is about making fair choices about where we get the money and where we put the money. If we were in government today, we would be able to get an extra £10.4 billion out of the windfall tax on the record excess profits of the big energy companies.
But would that help Joe, or would you be spending it elsewhere?
And we would use that to freeze council tax, for example, to bring down energy bills, which would be practical help for, I think, for people right across the country. I think there's other practical things we can do. We want to cut business rates with a view to replacing the system altogether, because we think there is a real imbalance between the bricks and mortar businesses of our high streets and the big online giants, and we've got to get that balance right. Because also, you know, this is also about our quality of life. If you're laying off those people that work for you because you haven't got the people coming through the door, it's just sucking more and more demand out of the economy. We've got to keep our high streets going, and we've got to support our high streets because it's part of our communities. So those are practical things that Labour would do, which I think would help in the immediate term. We do need a serious plan for growth. It was significant that John Allen, the chairman of Tesco, said when it comes to a serious plan for growth, Labour's the only team on the pitch. We put a lot of work into this because we know this matters. It's not just about, you know, people like Merryn having hopefully more positive graphs to look at and to bring us better news. When we were last in power, if the economy had grown under the last 13 years of Conservatives at the same rate it grew under the last Labour government, there would be £40 billion more to spend in public services or to give back to people through tax cuts without having to raise a single penny on anyone else. But in the meantime, the economy is in a mess, and whether it's the windfall tax on big oil and gas companies, or whether it's the abolishing the non-dom tax status so we can fund the NHS and introduce free primary school breakfast clubs, which would help kids to start the school with hungry minds, not hungry bellies, Labour's got the right priorities, the right values and the right plan to get us out of this mess to a brighter future that I think this country is desperately, hopefully, looking towards.
Lord Sentamu. Lord Sentamu.
Joe, I don't think I have words to say to you because you're describing what a lot of small businesses are going through at the moment. And everything I'll say probably will sound trite. You are in a very, very difficult place. How are you going to get out of that difficult place? Because, yes, inflation is coming down, it's 10.1, but food inflation is 16%. And the supermarkets are saying the prices are coming down. Well, most people don't actually feel it. And those who are on universal credit, they are actually being hit hardest. When the furlough scheme was brought in, that is a job retention, £70 billion was spent. My guess is small businesses did not get a fair share. They just didn't get a fair share. And my son is self-employed as a cameraman, and he's just in the same position you are in. So all I would say, really, is that although the taxation happens in a particular way and we mustn't discriminate, I just think for myself, if I was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I would look at small businesses that will go out and never return. What could we do, particularly in terms of VAT? And there is this business, don't do it all unless it is universal, but really, there must be a differentiation. If a business is going under, when I was Archbishop here, Porter Cabin was going under. And we didn't know whether it was going to stop. And I remember turning up and saying to the company, you could all stay in jobs, provided all of you are willing to get a proportionate cut of your income. You know, they work for 4 days a week. The bosses are the one that got the greatest cut. They made nobody redundant. You know, Porter Cabin in this particular place is a thriving business. So why can't we as a nation differentiate between smaller businesses that really would not come back if they went, and then the bigger ones that somehow get a better deal? And universal credit, I'm sorry, I've got to say, it ain't enough. It is not. It's not meeting the needs of people.
Okay. Carla.
Joe, thank you for this question. As Fiona said, this is really the situation that so many people are in. To address the immediate here and now of where you are, the Green Party, and I think the Green Party really is the party of small business. We've got the policies to help you out. We would, and we announced these in Small Business Saturday late last year, we would reform business rates. As Wes said, business rates are horribly unfair. They proportionally charge much more to smaller in-town and city centre businesses than the big out-of-town warehouse supermarkets. That needs to be flipped around, absolutely. We would support small businesses to green their operations so that they're using less energy, which is the biggest outlay for so many businesses. So we would provide grants to help you bring down your energy use, and we would make sure that in doing so it wouldn't push you up to the next level of business rates so that you were inadvertently paying for the luxury of doing so, which is something that I know some businesses are worried about currently. We'd also support small businesses with their national insurance contributions where they have a small payroll. But I know that that isn't enough on its own. The UK, I mean, I think like all of us here, I've been shocked by how much prices have gone up recently. Other countries are seeing inflation too, but it's worse in the UK. Now, why is that? It's complex, there's a few reasons. But I think especially with the food price inflation, as Lord Sentamu mentioned, it seems Brexit is part of the answer. There's been a study that showed that 6% of the food price inflation was down to Brexit. And another big part of the story is energy prices, because partly, substantially, our energy market is too reliant on fossil fuels still. It's still too reliant on gas, which is what has rocketed up. Renewables are I think, this may not be the most up-to-date data, but were at some point recently 9 times cheaper than gas. So the quicker we can get off our reliance on gas, the quicker we can get everyone's energy bills down and make life more affordable again.
Let me briefly come back to Joe before I can take one more question. Joe, anything you've heard made you feel more positive?
No. At the end of the day, VAT is absolutely ridiculous. We're a tiny little company. We charge £3 for a cup of coffee, and we pay 20% on that as VAT, just like that, for no reason.
All right.
But I can buy coffee beans in. As soon as I add hot water to them, I have to pay VAT, but I can't claim VAT back on that because a coffee bean doesn't have VAT in the first place. So much of the product that comes into hospitality, we can't claim VAT back, but we have to charge it the minute we heat it or add water to it, which is ridiculous. Business rates is outdated. The whole system is rubbish. And to be fair, I don't think the government has a clue what SMEs do. We have 44% of your workforce in this country, and we put £2 trillion into your economy, and you aren't looking after us. And it's a joke. You need to sort yourself out.
All right. I've let you make your point. I'm going to move on quickly. Joe, I wish you the best of luck. And if I'm anywhere near you, I'll nip in.
They need their pay rises. My team is amazing and they need their pay rises.
Let me get this last question in. From Thomas Lockwood.
Thank you, panel, and good evening. Has Labour lost the moral high ground with its attack ads on Rishi Sunak?
Right. So, for those of you, not everyone necessarily will have seen them. We've got them up actually here. There's been a number of them, and there's another one that's just come out tonight, I think, Wes, you were telling me. So, do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. And that's the basic gist of the attack ad. Have you lost the moral high ground, Wes?
I think the government lost the moral high ground when they allowed a situation where 98% of rapists in this country don't see the inside of a courtroom, let alone the inside of a prison cell. I think the government lost the moral high ground when they've made choices for 13 years that have hit people on low and middle incomes the hardest and the public services they rely on their knees. I think the government lost the moral high ground again in the budget, actually, when the only tax giveaway they gave was a £1 billion giveaway to people with the largest pension pots, while everyone else saw their taxes rise. Now, I know that...
But do you think Rishi Sunak does think...
If he doesn't...
that adults convicted of sexually assault children shouldn't be in prison?
If he doesn't think that, if he doesn't think that, the only other explanation is incompetence, and whether it's bad values or bad incompetence, it's not a great place for a Prime Minister to be. Now, I know
so
that...
would Labour change... So these guidelines, basically, what it's referring to, just for those of you who aren't aware, is that for people who sexually assault children over 13, there isn't an automatic custodial sentence. That was brought in, I think, in 2012. Would Labour change that?
We would toughen sentences Absolutely.
So would Labour change that?
Yes, that's what I've just said. We would toughen the sentences. And here's the other thing. I know that attack ads and negative campaigning isn't everyone's cup of tea. And let me tell you, as a campaigner and as a politician who goes through elections quite often in this country since I was elected in 2015, I would dearly love it if all the positive stuff I put out about expanding the NHS workforce or free primary school breakfast clubs got half as many shares and half as much discussion as the negative campaigning. You can help us with that by sharing the positive message, not just the negative. But look, we know at the next election, ultimately, we will seek to win trust on the basis of our positive argument and policies, but we're right to hold the government to account for their appalling record over 13 years.
I've got 4 minutes left on the programme, so you're going to have to be brief. Jeremy.
Yes, they have lost the moral high ground. These posters are disgraceful. They should not be putting out these posters. Wes didn't talk about the posters because he's embarrassed about them. He's a decent guy. I can't believe that you support this. It's not the right way to go ahead. If we want to have a debate on the fact, on the issues that you raise, like the changes to the lifetime tax allowance that you said was costing people's lives unless we withdrew it. That's why we withdrew it. You want to keep doctors in the NHS.
But doctors,
we have done that.
Literally everyone with big pension pots, like a targeted scheme for doctors.
This has been a very targeted scheme for Sir Keir. He had his own law passed on it, as I seem to recall, about his own pension contributions. Talking of which, he was sitting on the Sentencing Council. He was there taking decisions on sentencing. You know that MPs and politicians don't determine the sentences. When we try and put through legislation to toughen up these sentences, Labour remorselessly votes against it.
That's not true.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to... I need to get round on the panel. Merryn.
Would you like me to be very quick?
Yes.
No politicians have the moral high ground anymore. It's gone.
Right. Lord Sentamu.
Well, Elizabeth I said that she didn't have a window into people's hearts and souls. And that, to me, invites, unless you got evidence, which is written, which has been, to put up a poster like that is negative campaigning, which I've never supported. And secondly, I just want to remind people of the 1992 general election, the War of Jennifer's Ear. Do you remember it?
Yes, I remember it well.
Where there were two little girls who had this glue ear. One went private, one NHS, and you couldn't find which this little girl was, and it went on for 3 days. We were tortured by that debate. The results, when they were probably, Labour didn't think it would go. So be very careful, because as my mum said, never point a finger at anybody, because 3 others are pointing back at you.
As I suspect Thomas thinks from his question, I just don't think this personalised mudslinging is persuading anyone of the trustworthiness of these politicians. Wes said Wes said that he wants you to trust him and trust the Labour Party on the positive things they'll offer. Then why spend all of your money and time producing content that is just mudslinging? And it's the personality, it's the naming and as you say, claiming to see inside people's souls. Now, I am no fan of the Conservative Party, that's for sure, but I really try very hard to stay focused on the policies and on disagreeing or agreeing on the policies, not on insulting the individual.
OK. Thomas, let's come back to you. Thomas, so...
I absolutely agree, Carla, with everything that you said. I admittedly, when it came out, I thought this isn't atrocious, but there's an argument, it's quite distasteful. As the weeks have gone on here, 3 weeks on, still talking about it, it's just clear it's done no favours, and it's starting to backfire, actually, because...
I mean, some might say the fact that we're talking about it might suggest the
yeah, absolutely. I just think there's a danger that it could backfire in the Labour Party when they start looking into Keir Starmer's record, as outlined by the Conservative representative here.
Right, well, I'm going to have to end it there, I'm afraid. I'm sure you'd love to come in, Wes, but our time is up. Thank you very much. You'll be back. Our time is up. Thank you very much indeed to the panel, to our audience here in York, and thank you to you at home for watching. Of course, as you know, we're on BBC One off 10 o'clock news every week, but we're also on iPlayer at 8 o'clock if 10:40 is too late for you. Thank you so much for watching. From Question Time, until next week, bye-bye.